Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we talk about all things family building, how we create our families, and how we define them. This is your host, Julia. I am a solo mom by choice, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Carey Cook. Carey is a therapist. She practices somatic experiencing as one of her modes of therapy, and she focuses on providing coaching on family building and fertility to the queer community. And today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about her experience with her wife in building her family through embryo donation. Carey tried a lot of different mechanisms of assisted reproductive support, including IUI and IVF, but ultimately it was embryo donation that made her family. We're going to talk about that, as well as some really cool tips and tricks she has for everyone, not just members of the queer community, on how you figure out where you stand and how to make choices regarding the difficult decisions that you have when you're going through fertility treatments. It's a lot of work to figure out whether you go through this treatment or that treatment, and whether you keep going or stop or use this donor or that donor. And Carey has a really cool tool to figure out what you really want and to get comfortable with it by using your own body and your own intuition as a guide. I came away learning so much about making decisions and my own fertility experience through this conversation with Carey, and I know you're going to as well. If you love this episode as much as I think you will, don't forget to join our newsletter. The Stork'd newsletter on Substack covers anything related to family building that is current and timely, as well as my experience as a solo mom by choice. If you love the episode, share it, like, review, and here is Carey.
Carey, I am excited to have you here. We're going to cover who you are. We're going to cover what does it mean to be a therapist and a fertility coach. And we're going to talk about the way in which you support the queer community, which may have different needs than the straight community or the solo parent community or the people who are adopting or whatever the case may be. So let's start with your story, though, because I really want to get to the heart of who you are and how you came to your family building. You can start as early as when you met your wife and go from there.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Julia, for having me here. And my name is Carey Cook, and I am a mom of a donor-conceived kiddo. I am married to a fantastic woman, and we have been on this journey for some time. Professionally, I'm a therapist and a fertility coach for queer families. I met my wife in 2014, I think. We were married in 2018. I know that much. Married in 2018, and we started our family planning journey pretty quickly. We knew, we had talked about that, and we were both a little older, or what we felt was older at that time.
What was older at that time?
I think what was older of that time was like 36.
And pardon me for laughing because the message we receive as women is 36 is old, right?
Oh, yes. And I didn't end up having my child until I was 38. So I think that age is an interesting thing. But yes, at that time we felt, and we had heard stories about how long it could take, and we didn't know. And so I think we just both wanted to start the process to see. And a lot of our people that our friends in our soul family, they'd already started their families and they were having children. And we both really wanted that. We knew we wanted that from the beginning. And we started early. And I am glad we did, because it did take a little while, not nearly as long as it could have, but it took about 1.5 years total. And so we started for a lot of same-sex couples, I would say people with a vagina, same-sex couples start with IUI often.
Yeah.
So we started with that in that route. We did several IUI, I think 7 total. And we didn't think IVF was in the cards because of our insurance did not cover any fertility treatments. And so we're paying for everything out of pocket. We didn't think IVF was an option. And then my mother actually helped us, gave us kind of one shot at IVF, no pun intended.
Amazing.
Oh, yes, it was amazing. And it was really sad. So we tried reciprocal IVF, which is where I was going to take my wife's eggs and we'd make embryos and I would carry. And we knew from the beginning that I was going to carry. My wife didn't really have an interest in that. Didn't really feel called to do that. So that didn't work though. The reciprocal IVF didn't work. She was a couple years older than me and we didn't get any eggs. And that was really sad. And that was the beginning of us pivoting and going in a direction that I didn't know we were going to end up going at the beginning. And I didn't even know existed, honestly. I had never heard of embryo donation. And we really started looking at egg donation. And some of it, again, truthfully, some of it was financially driven. It was, what's the most efficient way? How can we have a child? And at that point, we weren't super connected to we didn't have to be genetically connected to our child.
So I just want to slow down for a second, because it seems to me like you had a shared vision around what a family could look like at the beginning and a shared path forward. Let's do IUI, which presumably if you're the person carrying, you're the person getting inseminated using your eggs. So then you pivot, right? So then you're pivoting to, okay, we're going to use the same sperm donor when you moved from IUI to IVF?
We had changed sperm donors a couple of times, but yes.
Oh, so that's so interesting. Okay, so I want to talk about that in a minute. In my story, as a straight solo parent, the migration from IUI to IVF is a medical one, and it's a financial one, and it's insurance driven. But it doesn't necessarily include an interplay between a partner and my genetics, right? So in your story, what's so fascinating, and you tell it with such agility, is that you're moving from all these different derivations of what the genetic composition of your future child could look like. Yours with a sperm donor, hers with a sperm donor, and now egg or embryo donation. Can you talk a little bit about like the thought process or the emotional experience of making those pivots?
Sure, absolutely. So, of course, I can only speak for myself. And at the beginning, I was going to be the one, it was going to be my eggs. And so my wife, I'm trying to remember if she went through a little bit of a journey around not being genetically connected at that point. Maybe a little bit. I think it was definitely a process when reciprocal IVF didn't work. I mean, that for us was the dream. And it was the dream that we didn't even know was going to be possible at the beginning because we didn't think we could afford it. And when I thought that I was going to have the option to carry her eggs and have her baby, quote unquote, of course, this baby was going to be and is ours, genetics or no genetics. Nothing will ever challenge that for me. But it was just going to be a really cool thing. It was going to be really amazing. And when that didn't happen, there was a lot of grief, which so much grief comes up in this process for anyone, I think, on a fertility journey, and especially involving the medical world, solo parents, LGBTQ. I think that's just a part of it. So I think that there was a lot of loss at that point, and it was just really sad. And also, we originally had said that if we didn't get pregnant, that was going to be it for us. We had these things where we didn't absolutely have to do this. And I think that in working with a lot of people on this journey, I know this to be true as well as it was true for me. I think there's a little bit of protectiveness that happens there. For gay people to even be able to have children, there is such a gratitude there when that gets to happen. And sometimes we can feel so lucky. And so there's always a little bit of, okay, it'll be okay if it doesn't happen. We'll still be okay. I did have a lot of clarity after that reciprocal IVF failed and really got in touch with how much I wanted it for myself and how much I wanted it for our family. And I think it helped to really get clear on, I no longer wanted to have that protective stance of we would be okay. I still knew we would be okay, but I really wanted to just claim, I want this for myself. And I say this really tenderly because I work with a lot of people who, and my wife included, like to go through to not be genetically connected is a process. And I don't know why that wasn't as much of a process for me. I really don't. I've thought about it a lot because I want to be able to support people in reframing their stories. And especially because I have people that want to be okay with that, but might not feel okay. And I'm not sure why I didn't. And maybe because it was because I was going to get to Carey. And then the second I did, I had the acid reflux and the constipation and all the things. Nothing was going to challenge. I was like, this is my baby.
Yeah.
But I didn't think of it.
But to some extent, even though you're saying I didn't have the sense of loss around being genetically connected to my child, what you're talking about is authentically owning your emotions, right? And it was, let's take the protective layer of it'll be okay, I'll be okay no matter what. Let's take that off and just be totally open-hearted and vulnerable in the fact that I really want to parent. That's a level of authenticity with your emotions that you were experiencing while other people may experience authenticity around, I don't know, this genetic component may be important to me.
Absolutely. And I think it's a real personal decision. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think that if there was going to be a right or what was best, I would say for people to be able to get clear with their own emotions and to be okay with that. And if a person doesn't want, because I've known lots of people that don't want the route that we took to have a child, that embryo donation doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And I think that is absolutely okay. Good to know that now before you don't want to just go into something that you don't really want. So I think that
Totally.
and there was, I would say, if I experienced any loss, it was definitely a loss of not being able to carry my wife's genetics. I think that was exciting to me. We already had nieces and nephews, and I was imagining just a little tiny one of those. And that was sad and hard during that time, for sure. I think that we get very attached as potential parents. And then, of course, as parents too, as like our children are this little miniature version of us. And as a therapist who worked with children and families as well for a long time, I would say that there might be some benefit to breaking a little bit of that thought because we just don't know. We just don't know what we're going to get. And our kids will be vastly different and they're going to be raised by us too. So that they're going to have bits of us no matter what.
That's totally right. And they come out their own person, right? And you're like, is this you? Is this me? Is this some genetic donor that I've never met before? It's you. It's this person.
Yes.
Personality or smile or toes or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So tell us more about the process. We left off at the grief that you were feeling around this reciprocal IVF, this one shot that your mother gifted you financially at reciprocal IVF failing. And then this grief that you guys were experiencing, specifically you around not being able to carry your wife's DNA. Talk to us about what happened from that point forward.
Yeah. So from there, my wife started to look at egg donation. And I think we both had that moment where we had some clarity and we said, I remember it very clearly. I think it was, I don't remember who said it first, but one of us said, I just don't feel done. And it was very clear that the other person felt that way too. And we both just felt that way, that we were not done. And I want to say she did some research after that and brought it to me and was saying, I've been looking this up. And then she said, and then there's egg donation, then there's embryo donation. And I was like, what is that? And I started to realize that there's these embryos that are not used with these families who have done, or these people or individuals who have done IVF. And we didn't really know where to go. So we did what a lot of modern people do. We went to Facebook and we looked at embryo donation groups.
I have to tell you, I was done with Facebook. I was like, outgrown it. It lost its usefulness to me until I started building my family. And the resources that are available on Facebook, if you're listening and you want the single mothers by choice in Massachusetts or the single mothers by choice over 40, or I'm sure the gay and lesbian community has a million, right? Egg donation for lesbians, probably.
Absolutely. It's a great place to have community. It was helpful. And I have not witnessed personally, but I have heard there are groups where people go for gay couples go, and there's actually people who will donate sperm, Facebook groups, and they work very hard to keep it safe and keep it in mind. But I don't know as much about those. I've never been to those personally, but the embryo donation, there are several groups and there is one specific to LGBTQ. And so we learned a lot about it from looking at those profiles and reading what people had experienced. And that was our introduction to it. Versus the other option for embryo donation is that agencies will also do that. They will collect embryos. And we considered that as well. We ended up doing a private embryo donation. And the reason for that, one was we just found one that felt right in truth. We had a gay male couple reach out to us and that it just felt right. But the other reason was that sometimes the agencies will have as much as 6 to 8 months of a waiting list. And the fees are a lot more expensive, where for a private embryo donation, you are just paying the legal fees because you can't charge for embryos in this country. And I'm not sure if you can in any country, but you can't charge money for them. That is illegal. But
I want to talk through a couple of different facets here. The first thing, and I'm teasing this out for our audience, is that there's multiple ways to find an embryo if you're looking to get the embryo donation route. One is private and one is through an agency. And the second is that there's some legal maneuvering, legal contracts, et cetera, that have to be managed like anything. And then the third is that you had a very personal and private experience where somebody chose you to be the recipient of their embryos. Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And because that can be really personal. There were some people that we spoke to that had a very different, and you want to talk about pivoting and like changing our ideas of what we imagined our family would be. Totally different. We always wanted an open donor, but the only ones available through sperm donor are the ones that are available once your child turns 18.
Right.
But for the embryo donation, there are people that they will say, we are looking for somebody to donate to in the Boston area, in the New York City area. And they want the full siblings, the product of any of those embryos, to be able to grow up together and have contact. And so it's very personal. Our donors were actually, I lived very far away. They said that they are willing to have contact, absolutely, but that it was really what we felt right what felt right to us as the parents. And I remember that statement feeling very good to me, again, feeling a little safe. Okay, these people, they really get it. Like this would be our child. And maybe in some ways that was a little process that I went through around it, coming from a donor, even though it was coming from a donor before. But yeah.
It's a little different. Yeah. When you were screening for embryo donors, it sounds to me like it was an inbound outreach. But if, say, you had several that you were looking through and sorting through, one of the things it sounds like you were filtering for was the level of contact between the donor family and your family. Were there other things you were looking for? Were you looking for certain values or certain physical characteristics or traits?
Surprisingly, not really physical traits. Other than I think the way it's so hard because they post these pictures of these little children and these babies. And honestly, I was almost everyone I looked at, I was like, precious. Yes. So it's more, I think it was more of an intuition. And I talk about this a lot with coaching clients. One of the things I work with a lot is tough decisions, because that is a big part of a fertility journey, figuring out what feels right to you. And it's a hard thing to put on paper. I respect the people that go on to write books about this stuff, because I can only ramble about it. The intuition of it felt right, where I would talk to some people and something didn't feel right. And the boundaries weren't there. They were asking too much too soon. There was a lot of assumptions or something just that didn't feel right.
Yeah. It strikes me like the fertility journey for me, I'm not the most decisive person, although I've really honed my decisiveness over time and as a result of fertility, because you're making trade-offs between tough, sometimes really not preferred options. And you have to just really get close to what does your heart tell you? What does your gut tell you? What does your intuition say? And not waffle, which was pretty much my MO for most decision making. And you're guiding clients through that. You've been through that yourself. Can you react a little bit to the decision-making process when you're on a journey like this?
Oh, goodness. I would say the things I tell people and the things I learned myself through this whole process is that I don't know if there's a right or a wrong. I think sometimes we just have to hold on and go with I'm a somatic therapist by trade. So I work a lot from the body. What the fancy word is, a fancy word for, we experience our stories with our minds and we can think about them and talk about them. And then our body is also experiencing our stories. And so I specialize in what that looks like when the body is specializing in it. So I listen to a lot to how my body is responding to something and let that teach me if something is a yes or a no.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that's probably my biggest process around decision making, and just knowing that there's going to be this very human experience that is honestly sometimes quite torturous. It can be one of the hardest things when you don't know what to do. And sometimes just waiting which is so hard in the fertility process, because we always feel like we're out of time. We want to get to the other side. We're ready to be that parent. We're ready to just be on the other side. which in truth is just a whole bunch of other waiting and unknown and everything else. But we want to get there. And so it can feel so hard to not know what to do, but to just have to hang tight and wait for the body to lean a little bit towards yes, or really be able to just trust that the answer is a no. Like I'm not feeling it.
Here's how I know you're an exceptional therapist, because you're answering questions. And as you're answering questions, I'm having like a moment where I'm like, oh, now I'm putting into clarity some of the things that I've been experiencing over the past number of years. So let me give you an example. And then I'm going to ask a follow-up question related to that. A friend of mine is a somatic therapist. I've done a little bit of work with her just out of curiosity, like 1 or 2 sessions.
Yay.
And I always tell people that when I made the decision to become a solo parent, when I picked my sperm donor, when I made certain decisions, there was this full body relaxation, this calm groundedness that was like,
yes.
Oh yeah, of course. That all the anxiety, all the frustration went away. And then when most recently I was making a preschool decision and I was anxious about it for months, and I'm certain I made the wrong decision because I was anxious about it. So where I'm going with that is, I think my process through fertility was to learn what a yes felt like in my body and what a no felt like in my body. And I would never have articulated it that way before talking to you. Mm-hmm. As it translates into a question, I'm curious, in your body, what does a yes and no feel like?
In truth, I think it's a lot of what you described. There's a relaxation. There's sometimes a little bit of a lift, like it's moving towards something, a little bit of that excitement or giddy. So there can be a little fast, but there's also that little slow of a calm, a deep breath. I think that describes it. It can depend on what I'm trying to, because sometimes we have to say yes to very hard decisions. So there was a time before I got pregnant where I decided to take a break. And there was all these reasons why, of course, I didn't want to do that. And I can remember when I knew I needed to do that. And on top of that, my wife was 100% supportive. In some ways, there's parts of the fertility process when you're carrying and you're getting the shots and you're getting all of this, where it is like it was my body as a couple. It is very much your journey, but sometimes it has to be about me and my body too. And she didn't want to take a break, not necessarily, but of course wanted to support me. And so having to know that I was going to be a little potential of disappointing her, which, and it all worked out, of course, okay. But having to come to that yes was hard. And when I did finally come, yes, there was some relaxation, but there was a heavy knowing to that. I felt sad also that it was a yes. Like I knew I needed this, even though it was going to be hard. Does that make sense?
So it doesn't always feel like freedom.
It doesn't always, like I say to clients always, it might not feel good, but does it feel right?
That was where I was going next, is how do you teach clients to learn what their yes and no feels like?
Really, just like I'm talking right now, I give a lot of examples, and I think experiential is the best way to do it. My coaching curriculum I have a 6-week coaching curriculum, and pretty early on, I teach just this because we're going through themes of anger and resentment, grief and loss, safety, money stuff, all these things, family, boundaries, learning our body and how to listen to our body through that is pretty key. And I think that experiential is honestly the best way. You can give people a food that they like and a food that they don't like, and they can have an experience of yes and no. When I used to work with children, I don't work with children as much anymore, but when I used to work with small children, I would have those really sour ones or the really hot candies.
Yeah.
Really sweet. And so I'd let them try both. And then we'd take a minute. And then we would go to this, slide that over. You don't know which one you're going to get. Okay. Oh, it's the sweet one. And they'd be able to feel the smile. Oh, yay. And their body says, oh, goody. Or I open my hand and it's that sour, that hot one. Oh, they wince, they tense up, they pull them back. Their body says no to that. Except kids often like hot and sour. So I'd have to get creative with that. But
yeah. Okay, listeners, I hope that you're listening to this and you're thinking about what your yes and no is. And if you need to explore that, try testing yourself with some things that you know you love and you know you don't love, and see how it feels in your body. We're getting free therapy right now. This is incredible. Seriously, unbelievable. Okay, so this couple reaches out to you. They have an embryo or several embryos that they've created with their sperm and presumably an egg donor. Mm-hmm. and they say, this feels like a good fit. And your body says, yes, this feels like a good fit. Where do you go from here?
Honestly, it was thankfully what felt like very simple from there. Of course, there was some legal stuff that had to happen. That didn't feel very hard. So I will say this, the more specific that donors are about what they want, there might be controversy around the paperwork. But in theory, a lot of it's very standard. The donors are completely surrendering any parental rights. And then with that, there's just pages and pages of a way saying that in different ways, in different scenarios. And then there might be a few scenarios that like contingencies. So our donors, for instance, if we had embryos left over, they wanted those embryos donated to another gay couple, another queer person that wants to grow their family. So that was something that we had to do. We also agreed to stay in touch. So we're legally bound to just not to stay in touch in a certain way, but to just say, if I move to, I don't know, somewhere, Canada, I have to tell them that. They have to know how to get in touch with me, basically, and vice versa.
That's fair. And has that proven to be the extent of your communication, or have you guys chosen more communication or more contact than what was specified in your legal documents?
Actually, I think we've chosen a little bit more communication. There is actually some things in the works for us to all meet. And again, this would not have been anything I ever expected, but it just feels right, and they're great, and it just feels really good. And there's a couple of families involved, just 3 total families involved that also this was a very large batch of embryos. And so there's 3 families involved that also have embryos. And so it
was the original creators with their sperm and a donor egg, you guys, and then the family that got it after you. Is that correct? The batch?
Technically 2 other families.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now the tables are turned, right? Instead of being the one receiving the embryos, you guys presumably pick the next couple or person who
So that
receives.
is all finished. That's all finished. The embryos have all been used. But yes, we did donate some embryos. And yes.
And what was the criteria that you made to donate the embryos? Like, how did you pick the next recipients?
So we had to use similar criteria that they did. So we had to use a queer couple, and we didn't plan on donating when we did. It just happened. And how we chose was they actually came to us wanting to just ask questions. They were the friends types of things. We didn't know them personally. And we just listened to their story. And we both felt it was, again, one of those things where we didn't say it in the moment, but after, as soon as we got off the phone with them or off the Zoom call with them, we just checked in, and we were like, wow, I feel like we could possibly help them if they were interested. And we put that out to them, and we sat on it for a little bit, thought about it, put that out to them, and they were very excited. And
is donor conception and the experience of being donor conceived, there's a lot of stuff that's bubbling up appropriately around that. More and more people are talking about it, acknowledging it, identifying it, and finding resources for donor conceived people. It's something I obsessively pay attention to as a parent of a donor conceived person, because I want to make sure he gets supported.
Absolutely.
So several questions about that. The first is, if your kiddo wants to know more about the egg donor, do you have information about that you can share?
Yes, absolutely. So we have bunch of information up front that we can share, pictures, family history, all of that. And then we also there is agreement that if contact is ever wanted, that can happen.
Oh, that's amazing. Because that's the thing that you don't get to control when you're getting an embryo. It was the previous couple had that contract or that relationship created.
Yes.
Right?
It's true, especially with a gay male couple. And there was pros and cons to that. On one hand, you're right. We did not personally get to know the egg donor. However, what we did get was very well-tested embryos. And that was because they had to use surrogacy. And so they had to be FDA approved. So that is something that within this private donation that happens doesn't always happen.
There's so many layers here. And the other thing that I really appreciate about the private donation route that you've gone is that you can wrap your arms around the known universe of children who might be genetically related to your child.
We know exactly how many and who they are, which is nice. I had a friend recently look up through the sibling registry, and that can get tricky. And there was a lot of kids, put it that way. There's lots of children. And there are 6. There will be 7. There will be 7 children total. And that's it. And
and that seems like an appropriate size. It's the not knowing how many times a sperm donor has donated is terrifying as a parent, and for a child who doesn't know how many people they're going to be related to when they get older and try to start counting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in my coaching business, I work with the parents who are going to be parents of donor conceived children, but that's not really my topic. I'm more of before you become a parent, that emotional journey of the fertility process. But I love that we're hearing so much more about all things donor conceived. There's a bunch of stuff. I know more that's happening in the UK than I do here.
Yes.
Ironically.
Not ironically, they're just way ahead of us in terms of regulation and protecting the rights of donor conceived people. Let's talk about your coaching for a minute. You've just identified your niche, which is you specialize in families that are trying to figure out how to go through the process of becoming a family, whether that involves kids or not, what sort of medical treatments are required, what is the mechanism, IUI, IVF, egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, are some of the things that have already come up in this conversation, surrogacy. And you specifically do it for the queer community, the LGBTQ plus community.
Yes, that's right.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the way the needs of that community may be different from other communities?
Sure, I can try. I've only mostly worked with queer families, so I know those needs, but I think that I don't want to make assumptions that I know what it's like for a straight family. Just like we don't want assumptions as LGBTQ, we don't want people to assume what our journey is like. I don't want to assume that I know what a straight journey is like. I think that one of the basic assumptions, without knowing a lot of straight couples have to go on and get fertility care. That is a fact. I know that and it seems to be even getting more and more, but they do often get to start in the intimate setting of their home.
Yes.
And that's where they get to be. And for some people, there is such thing as at-home insemination. And for a lot of queer families, that is something that gets to happen. And that's awesome. And sometimes I wish it would have been cool to maybe have had the guts to do that in some ways. I told myself, though, 36, I'm getting geriatric, I got to go. And I think for a lot of people, that's true. I think that they start right in that medical setting. And that right there is one big difference, because we go to medical settings because something's wrong. And we're under the care of a doctor because something's wrong. And for most reproductive clinics, IVF, IUI is presented as a medical option to treat something that is wrong. Having a baby in the way that it was going to happen at home didn't work, or there was something with the anatomy or with whatever, all the reasons that happen. And so for a gay couple going into, or for any queer person walking into that fertility clinic, there might not be something wrong. Maybe some of them have endometriosis or they have something, but for a lot of people, they're just trying to have a baby in the only way that they can. And they're using science to do so.
That's exactly like the solo parent journey, right? I did do the at-home insemination to have that experience at home and like an environment that felt safe, but that was also COVID, which drove that. But the thing that was really interesting about what you just said, and was true for my experience as well, is that you're walking in and people are treating you like you're already wrong. And so if I'm a straight person and can say this, I hope I can, for so many years, being gay was considered wrong. And for so many years, being a solo parent was considered wrong. And so you're walking into an institution already having tried to, in my case, let go of that story. That's not my story. Being solo is not wrong. So I think there's an interesting psychological element to the context of I'm not wrong, you're not wrong, but we might be treated that way.
Yes. And I think even when you go to a wonderful clinic, we had a very good experience at our clinic. But I think even if you are at a clinic where everything is wonderful, because of, like you said, because of this long-standing stigma that has been there for a long time, it's going to just something might just feel not quite right in our body and in ourself. And that was it can feel very isolating, and
Yes.
talk about something that's going to muddle your whole experience, your decision making, your ability to listen to yourself, your ability to remember why you're there and get in touch with the joy, how you then respond to others, family members, friends. There's a lot of intentional people out there that just might not quite say the right thing, or they ask a million questions when it's like, can you just listen?
Yeah.
Where we have to end up educating people a lot. As gay people growing families, my wife and I had to do a lot of education on how it was even working. And sometimes that feels okay. And sometimes you just don't want that.
Yeah.
And it can feel very overwhelming and stressful. And I think that is really what inspired me most to want to be a support to this population of people who are trying to grow their families. And then my specific curriculum, I honed in, created the very program that I would have wanted, and created something that I think would be helpful for people.
Tell us about some of the themes or questions that your client base brings to you. What are some of the things that come up regularly for the people that you serve?
So of course, each person comes in with their own individual story and their own nuance. This is why I'm doing this, or this is what I'm struggling with. I do work with people who are just getting started, and they are a little bit more in that, like, getting clear. This is what I need. This is what I want, or I don't know what I want. And that process might look a little different for people who are coming in and they've been doing this for a long time, and they've listened to I have a free mini course about really removing those emotional blocks. And they've been doing this for a long time, and they're just really feeling the feels and looking for some relief. I think that those are going to look a little different, but the similarities, I feel like I named some in that, just the unknown and the waiting. I would say the waiting is a huge one. There's so much waiting. You're waiting for your cycle to start. You're waiting to take your medicine for this much time. You're waiting for of course, the famous 2-week waiting. There's just so much waiting. And then I think families is another one that comes up a lot. I think because of some of what we mentioned with this stigma, not that people come in and some people come in and they might not have supportive families. Some people come in and have really supportive families, intention, and still how to talk to people, how to figure out your own boundaries, what's right for you, what you want to share, what you don't want to share, what your own limits are is another one. What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? That's such a personal decision. Some people don't want to use a lot of medicine, and they just don't. And that is okay. Really figuring out, again, what's right for you and your body and your family. It's a lot of different things that people come in for, but that
it's huge. I think it's really helpful and cathartic to hear some of those things. And I always talk about it as trade-offs, right? You have to make these trade-offs using imperfect decision sets. And then you have to get comfortable with the results of that trade-off.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that just having an ally and someone to be alongside your journey while you're making those big decisions, or during a period of time that just feels especially hard, so then you can recharge your battery and get back out there, can be really invaluable.
Totally.
Yeah.
So you used a word at the very beginning of the conversation that I wrote down because I really loved it, and that was soul family. So you help people build families. You have built your own family, and you have people in your life that you consider soul family. Can you talk to us a little bit about what family means to you?
Yes, I can. And I am very fortunate that I have a wonderfully supporting family that I was born into. I have that. And there's aunts and uncles and cousins, and I feel really grateful to have that. And everyone has been very accepting of my process and my journey and my child and my wife and all of that. And I have, maybe because I am an only child, sometimes I wonder, I have gone on also to just create a wonderful, what I would consider a soul family, people who have been in my life for many years, going all the way back to college, that I just are just near and dear to me, and they are just a part of me. And I would say that has made it even easier. I don't know if I would ever have considered my child like my soul family. He's just my family. But I definitely do. If I were forced to break it down, I do believe that we all, I think even blood family, if you want to be honest, is still soul family personally. I think it's just a deep connection and a calling. And it's like the ultimate example of your body saying yes, even when it's hard. And that's where sometimes, even in families where you have been born into families, your body might say no to someone. And that is just a part of the journey. And so that's where I think that sometimes we just get to make our families and choose our families with that's a personal thing. I don't have a belief. There's a lot of people that have a belief family is family no matter what. And I think there is some truth to that. But I also feel like we invest in each other as families. And that feels important to me. We commit to each other's growth and change and who we are as people. And
yeah, I hear all that and I appreciate it. And it can get tricky. Choosing to not continue a relationship with somebody who has previously been considered family is a big deal. There's some agency, right, in who's in our family unit, whether or not they're genetically related to us.
Of course.
Yes.
Deeply personal.
Deeply personal. Yeah. Well, we've gotten pretty damn personal today.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
Is there anything we haven't covered? Anything that you just feel is in your soul that needs to come out today?
I would say that there is such thing as coaching programs and therapists where you can go and you invest in yourself. And those are wonderful things. There is also just so many free resources out there. These podcasts are a great example. I'm late to the podcast world. I did not realize how much. Podcasts are just amazing, and you can find podcasts on anything. I love them. That's a great example of free resources. Like I have a free mini course for people who are struggling. There's just so many ways to get support. And I think my hope for anyone out there struggling, of course, I have definitely been called to help the LGBTQ group, population, people, humans. That's really where I have a huge passion in helping that. But anyone who's on a fertility journey that's struggling, my hope is that they can just pull out the technology. It's one advantage to it, and just find some support, find some answers to whatever it is that people are looking for.
But it's so important because particularly when we're talking about fertility journeys, it can get very expensive, and time and money are limited resources. And if you're going to invest in yourself, sometimes we have to remember that it is a privilege to invest in yourself, but it doesn't have to be a financial privilege. It can be affordable. There are some free resources that you can access. And so I think that's a really good reminder. And libraries, a lot of the books and resources that people reference are available in libraries.
It's true. And honestly, I'm, connected to a ton of fertility coaches. And we give out a ton of free stuff. I just looked this morning and one of them was giving out like an entire book. It's just amazing. There's a calling to be there to share support and wisdom and community.
Yeah, this is so helpful. Thank you so much. If we want to know more about your work, maybe we want to work with you and get coached by you or see that mini course of yours or just generally learn more about what you do, how do we find you?
Absolutely. So my website is embodiedpride.com. And my Instagram, which is another place to find me, is @embodied.pride. Those are my two spots for now.
And listeners, even if you are not somebody who identifies as a member of the queer community, I hope that you took something special from this, especially like some of the free resources and tools and the getting familiar with what your somatic experience, your bodied experience is with yeses and nos. And maybe that helps you on your journey.
I love that. Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram @Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.